you can be offensive all you want, but as long as you're not going into some areas where you are prohibited from going into, like inciting people to violence and stuff, or deliberately engaging in falsehood, uttering falsehoods.
Mhm.
If you're not doing all of that, yeah. So you can be offensive all you want. You'll be fine under the First Amendment, which gives you a lot of space to swing your arms and be offensive and all that. Except that
Welcome back to your weekly dose of transformation. Transform you, family, my transformers. Grab your notebook, your favorite beverage, and get ready to dive deep into real talk, actionable steps, and a whole lot of heart. I'm your guy, Marcus Hart. Have you ever said something on stage or maybe simply on a social media post that landed with a thud or triggered an unexpected backlash? Today, we're talking about that fine line between being funny and accidentally crossing boundaries, whether you're on a big stage or simply cracking jokes with friends. Our guest, Mr. Carl Unegbu, isn't just any lawyer. He's fascinated with the unique world of comedy and fascinating challenges it presents. You see, Carl, he has been at the intersection of show business and the law for years, helping comedians stay funny and out of the courtroom with stories, some shocking, some hilarious. Featuring folks like Dave Chappelle and Conan O'Brien, Carl reveals the secrets of effective legal humor. Today, he's bringing these legal insights to us. Think of it as self defense for your sense of humor, recovering boundaries, how to protect yourself in this social media era, and most importantly, how to build your resilience for those moments. Get ready to laugh, learn, and transform the way you think about communication. Welcome to the show, Mr. Carl.
thank you, sir.
How's it
Appreciate being
going?
here.
Yeah. How was that introduction, by the way?
It was great. It was great. Thanks. I'm honored by it.
That's great. That's great, Carl. And I know I said you know about a little bit about yourself, a great deal. And I want to mention to the audience too that I know you heard lawyer and you automatically thinking that like the book is probably like very serious, but the book we already talked about it on the other side that is very easy to it's a very easy read. He made it for guys who are C students like myself. So Carl, in your own words, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your book that is available on Amazon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marcus, for having me. By the way, my name is Carl Unegbu, as Marcus told you, and the book's title is Comedy Goes to Court, When People Stop Laughing and Start Fighting. So I am a lawyer and a journalist by training, and, and so the book was written by me as some kind of service to the industry, comedy industry, and then, again, to the broader public out there. And despite being a lawyer, this is not a book, again, written for lawyers. It was written by a lawyer, yours sincerely, but it wasn't written for lawyers. It was written for you, comedians, and the broader society out there. And you can tell that from the language that the book is written in. It's the kind of language you could see in People magazine, or if you read the New York Post, page 6, that kind of simplicity of language, more conversational, colloquial, that, sort of like something everyday folks can, come into. So, yeah, so that's where that is at. But the book um, explains comedy, explains the law to comedians. And I wrote the book from my experience covering the comedy industry. Um, I was an editor of the comedy website. We cover comedy. It's a news site called Comedy Beat for like a couple, up to 10 years. So we covered comedy, visited clubs, talked to comedians, and blogged on comedy. So I got to really know the industry very well. And on the side, I wrote a blog too, covering, comedians interfacing with the law. Well, the interface is not some something they chose to do. It was something that kind of came to them. they were forced into it, so it kind of was awkward. But the interface happened anyway, comedians and the law. And so that's what that blog was. And ultimately, this book is a byproduct of that blog. So, I hope that in reading the book, you will take the issue seriously and maybe make use of some of the lessons from the book, cautionary tales and things. You can make use of them in your daily life, whether you're a comedian or more broadly, a member of our society who cares about issues concerning free speech and the First Amendment and woke ideology and cancel culture. So all those issues and concerns are wrapped into this book.
Think you're doing wonderful work, man. By the way, like again, I can't thank you enough. I know I said that offline, but I definitely want to say it in front of the audience that, like, I believe, what you're doing, for our country, and for comedians, and other entertainers too, and just the everyday common folks is an amazing service. Uh, how did you get hooked up with the comedy world? I know this is a question you hear a lot, and it seems like it. The comedian. We think automatically about the clown sitting on the stairway, crying. That's the first thing we think of. But like you just the two don't you don't necessarily hear the two paired together, law and comedy.
I know it's something of a tale of two strange bedfellows, if you will. Um, well, first, how did I get into comedy? Well, I studied journalism at Columbia, and when I was in school at Columbia, we here in New York City, I occasionally went out to comedy clubs to listen to comedy, write about comedians, things of that nature. But it was just something for some extracurricular thing for sometimes class submission and things like that. So it wasn't anything serious. It was just, something a student was doing. So fast forward to after I graduate school and then went out there in the world. Um, so I became a journalist. Then I kind of went back to the law, got my license again because I had been a lawyer in Florida before I came to Columbia. So I got my license again to practice law. And then while I was doing that, some colleagues of mine, former friends of mine from the journalism school, said, well, guy, why don't we try to like maybe have some kind of media news operation, maybe cover comedy. And the whole thing about comedy really, yeah, it really stuck out to me. You know, it resonated with me because I had done some stuff in comedy before when I was in school, writing about comedy. So that was why they thought that, yeah, this might appeal to me, and they were right. Yeah, I liked the idea, and then so we started this news site called Comedy Beat, and then
Mhm.
over time we were covering comedy, and then during the time I covered comedy, I was also a co-host of a program we used to call Comedy Dialogue in New York City. It was a
Yeah.
quarterly series. Once every quarter, we had comedians come to a place, usually in the evenings. Over wine and cheese, there'll be lots of talk and things. And then we will have comedians give like 10 minutes each, maybe about 4 or 5 comedians, go do a comedy performance for about like 10 minutes each. And then after that, they'll settle down, on a panel and we'll discuss, issues that are at the time, whatever issues were current or, whatever issues were getting traction in the industry at the time. So, they'll have that conversation and then there'll be an audience Q&A. So it was a whole thing every quarter, right? And we did that for like a couple years. And then, of course, it was during those sessions that I had some of my fans who read my blog. They suggested to me, well, why don't you like, I mean, these subjects you're covering are like really, solid. They are very good. They catch a lot of fire. Why don't we, again, how about you write a book? Everybody writes a book these days. Why not you? So I started to think about it, and so that was how I decided to do it as a service to the industry and in response to those suggestions and those requests. So that's how the book came about, and that's how I went from comedy into the book, and the rest is history.
Can just imagine some of those conversations on that podcast. You know, just imagining like having comedians getting 10 minutes apiece, just to say whatever they want,
Right? Exactly. Exactly.
freely.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
in New
that's
York
pretty
too. In New
exciting,
York too.
man.
Yeah. And in New York too.
Yeah, in New York.
In New York, the Big Apple of all places.
Yeah, all places, like and that's an incredible journey to lead to where you are now. And it really does kind of shape where the core of like how you rolled into the book, and and how we have this, it's almost like a guideline on how we can kind of save like what's kind of happening, what we see now. Carl, in like when we think about this age of social media, especially, where a misplaced joke can like kind of spiral out of control. What are some simple things everyone, not just comedians, should keep in mind to avoid like an accidental, you know, major, something accidental that can cause a major offense?
Yeah. I wish there was a very simple answer to that. It's just that we live in a society today that is undergoing some very fast, very dramatic changes. It is also very polarized and polarizing and getting worse. So there is no easy answer to that, except to say that at least one can try to stay within the boundaries that the law permits. So that way you don't get into legal jeopardy. But at that point, you might simply have to worry about the court of public opinion, not the court of law. And the court of public opinion is a real problem, like I said, because of the polarization of things. So, for
Mhm.
instance, with the new cancel culture situation and woke things, the boundary lines are not clear. Sometimes, I mean, they keep changing. What is woke keeps changing. What is woke and acceptable, they keep changing. Sometimes you don't even recognize that the line is drawn somewhere until you're past the line. And people are calling you out for going past the line, and you're like, actually, where is the line? That kind of thing. And the
Yeah.
what is woke and what is acceptable, it keeps shifting.
Hmm.
So things that were accepted, maybe sometimes, maybe say 10 years ago, you say those things today, you get in trouble. So I mean, or maybe 5 years ago. So the standards keep shifting. But especially in our polarized times, and they keep shifting with very serious consequences, you know, career destruction, threats and things like that. So it's not like they are shifting in a harmless way. No, they are shifting in a way that's really, can get really dangerous for people. But at the very at the very least, one could at least try to stay uh, legit with the law. If you're talking about something, as long as you're not going into the area of incitement, you're not inciting people to violence, or you're not, um, using what they call fighting words that could provoke an attack when they are used, and things of that nature. But the thing is, under the law, you can be offensive all you want, but as long as you're not going into some areas where you are prohibited from going into, like inciting people to violence and stuff, or deliberately engaging in falsehood, uttering falsehoods.
Hmm.
If you're not doing all of that, yeah. So you can be offensive all you want. You'll be fine under the First Amendment, which gives you a lot of space to swing your arms and be offensive and all that. Except that Once you go past the red lines drawn by the law, then you could get in trouble. But the good news is the red lines are drawn very farther out. There's a lot of
Right.
leeway, a lot of room to swing your arms and things like. I mean, you almost have to be meaning to break the law before you can break the law when it comes to free speech. The protection is that big, that expensive. So it takes a lot to really, go past the lines. Unfortunately, like I said, beyond the law, there is the court of public opinion waiting for you on the other side. And with that kind of court of public opinion, all hell, I mean, all bets are off. You don't know where the lines are from
Yeah.
day to day, and they keep changing. What is woke? What is woke is never like something, reliably certain. It's like very, very changeable, very dynamic, and that's where the problem arises. How can you organize your life so you can stay safe from the mob, so to speak? Well, it's not
Mhm.
always easy, but it can be done. Unfortunately, it's getting harder and harder. And like I said, I mean, I wish I could have made a simple statement in terms of like, giving you guidelines on how to stay safe from cancel culture and things. I mean, all I can uh, guide you with is, the law itself. But the law itself is
Yeah.
only part of the picture. There is another thing or another world out there beyond the world of the law, which is the world of public opinion, where you have cancel culture and woke ideology operating. And yeah, that's a very challenging environment. And it gets worse.
I think that's like probably the biggest problem is like, do at what point do we start feeling like we have to start educating the cancel culture and the lynch mob because it seems like they have a strong influence in these courts sometimes and then you would think that like judges and then the jury box um don't take what they see on social media into consideration with like these different groups that's waving these different flags, waving these different posters and trying to sway the jury, sway the judge a certain way. Um, is there any way around that other than like maybe the idea of just maybe further educating the masses?
Well, I don't know that the masses want to get educated. I mean, they seem to have hardened opinions about this. See, we live in a different time today. The era we live in today
Mhm.
is different from where things were even just a generation ago. Today, people are so sensitive. The political correctness situation is really the environment, in which everything else now, has to operate. Whether you're talking about politics, you're talking about music or comedy, so the environment has shifted, dramatically, where you you have a very sensitive society. People are sensitive about all sorts of things. Usually, the goal is to protect vulnerable segments of our society. Folks who historically have been oppressed. Maybe they were gay, or maybe they were transgender, or they were racial or ethnic minorities. All that sort of stuff, or they were women. So, because of the backdrop of our society that has had so much discrimination in the past against various groups, so there are all those groups now that contemporary society feels ought to be protected. And the vehicles for doing this are things like, political correctness, cancellation, this woke ideology. So these are like, environmental things that emerge from the environment, a reaction to what the backdrop has been, and a way to kind of mediate, what happens, in the present and going into the future. So the problem is environmental. Um, if you try to educate the public, the public will probably think they should educate you. You might get, they might think you're the problem if you don't see things their way.
Yeah.
If you don't want to get with the program, then you're the problem or part of the problem. So
Hmm.
It's a tough thing, but
Yeah.
if you're a judge, if you're in the judge, uh, if you're in the arena of judges and jurors and things of that nature, then your sector is different. And if you do your job the right way, you're not supposed to be unduly influenced by what the mob is saying on the outside. The mob's problem is the mob's problem, but the law is the law. The law protects you, the law gives you guarantees and things. But the law cannot protect you against perhaps negative feelings from your neighbor, for instance, or from the broader society. So that's the problem. And it's always been that way. It's just that it is worse today. But always there's the law and then there's society, two different sectors. The things that the law can allow you to do, society may not allow you to do that. It was always that way, but now it's much more um, problematic and really consequential because, um, society now, like, they could deny you a job by canceling you, even though the law would
Mhm.
not do that to you. The law protects your job, your ability to get a job and keep a job. But the law cannot protect you against society that maybe cancels you. If they don't want to watch your show anymore, or for some reason don't want to patronize your business because of their feeling that, because they feel offended by something you've said, or something you've done, or something you are alleged to have said or done, then the law can't really like protect you that way. If the public doesn't want to keep dealing with you or patronizing your business or coming to your shows, I don't know if I'm making any sense.
You are.
Yeah, so that's the
Yeah.
problem. There is one part is the law, and the other part is public opinion. And in America today, that's the real problem. The law allows you to do so much. The First Amendment lets you say so many things. If you're going to be anti-Semitic, for instance, the First Amendment even lets you be anti-Semitic. If you're going to be racist, the First Amendment even lets you be racist. But if you do those things, how will the society how will the society respond to that? See, that's the problem. If you're racist or anti-Semitic or you're anti-feminist or whatever, then you could get in trouble with the society, even though the law would not punish you for those very things. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's very insightful, and it shows your huge, your huge understanding of what's happening in today's climate, and you're so right, man. It's very unfortunate, and I feel like every day we're walking on hot levels, and 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 I'm hoping that it doesn't get worse before it gets better. So but sometimes when we feeling like we're being stretched out like a rubber band, sometimes we got to have that big
Right, right, right.
pop back before we can snap back into form. So
But speaking of
so
comedy, though, uh,
yeah, go ahead.
speaking
No,
of
no,
comedy,
you're good.
comedians have a particular challenge with this situation because comedians by nature, they are folks who talk for a living. They just talk. That's what comedy. You talk for a living, and when you talk, trying to make a joke, a lot of times at the expense of people or at the expense of things in society, well, you're bound to, you're liable to offend people. And when you offend people, yeah, you attract things like lawsuits and hostile um, reactions and things. And then, when the standards now change, you're supposed to not say some things, or they perceive you as punching down. They say you're
Yeah,
punching down, you're attacking a vulnerable people, maybe disabled people, or Jews or black people or women, historically marginalized groups, historically marginalized groups. So if they feel you're attacking those groups, then they come for you. So the question is, where do you draw the line? It's a good thing for the society to try to, you know, advocate for historically oppressed groups, right? But
Right.
how far do you go to do that? I mean, do you go overboard as to prevent people from having their constitutional rights to free speech? I mean, where do you draw the line? So yeah, there is something to be said for um, being eager to protect those kinds of groups. But now, does it mean you close off every space for free speech and maybe even jokes and things like that? Well, the jury is still out on that. And as we go into the future, there's a negotiation going on right now in terms of where that line can be drawn. And comedians can no longer say, well, we should be allowed to say whatever we'd like to say. Well, that's like the dominant, the prevailing view in the comedy world. They say, well, you can't control us. This is our comedy. You don't want to listen, then you leave. Well, it's easy to say that, except your job, your ability to continue to do your job and to make a living could depend on how the public feels about your brand of comedy.
Right.
So think of it as like a service. Well, if you're offering a service and the consumers, maybe because of the influence of cancel culture and woke people, maybe their mentality has changed. Their taste in jokes have changed. For instance, if their taste in jokes, has changed because of the way they have been conditioned by things like woke ideology and stuff, then it means that as consumers of your product, they may not want to buy your product if it's packaged in a certain way. So if you're making jokes that they no longer find funny, things they find offensive because they think you're punching down, then it becomes a problem. Now you become like somebody who wants to sell something that the consumers, because their tastes have changed, no longer want to buy. So, for comedians, that presents a real particular problem. The way to like render jokes in a changing environment, cancel culture and things like that. Yeah, because those things are real. They exert a real impact, not just on comedy, even in politics. If you're a politician
Yeah.
and you say some things that people feel, are insensitive or racist or anti-Semitic, your career could literally end. Yeah, if you're a musician and you do a similar thing, yeah, you could face a destructive boycott. So it's a different society, and in some ways, it's also a scary time. Because you no longer just have to comply with the law. You also have to comply with the public opinion and the changing tastes in public opinion. And like I said, these tastes they keep changing from time to time. Sometimes you don't know you've crossed the line until they start calling you out, and you're like, "Well, I didn't know there was a line here." That kind of thing.
I
Yeah.
know you deal with a lot of stories, and I'm wondering, speaking of which, since we kind of dealing with this right now, are there any moments, well, maybe like where humor didn't land quite right, where you got a story from the book where a comedian or a public figure like kind of bouncing back from like that kind of awkwardness where a humor didn't land right?
Oh yeah, I have lots of stories in the book, especially in the chapter on free speech, for instance. You know, you had people like Jerry Seinfeld, like one time Jerry Seinfeld or Jimmy Kimmel, John
Oh
Oliver,
yeah, I heard
Bill
that.
Maher, all those guys. Yeah, there are lots of stories about these guys with their humor that didn't
Yeah.
land okay, and they got a serious pushback. In some cases, they prevailed, but it was tough to go through. It was like running the gauntlet of a tough, race. Walking over coals, hot coals. Like let's say Bill Maher. One time, I mean, Donald Trump, for instance, sued Bill Maher one time over a joke Bill Maher made about, his birth certificate. He said Donald Trump's hair was like had the color of an orange orangutan. That those are the two things in life, the two things in nature that have the same color. That Donald Trump was half human, half orangutan. That if he could prove that he's the child of two human beings rather than an orangutan and a human being, that he would give him $5 million. That kind of joke. I mean, it was a silly joke, but It was a joke anyway that he made on
Yeah.
Jay Leno's show. Well, he said he would give him $5 million, and the backdrop to that story was when Donald Trump said that Barack Obama, wasn't born in this country. That if Obama could prove, if he could show his birth certificate, he would give him $5 million. So Bill Maher turned it around on Donald Trump. So well, if you could prove that you're not the son of an orange orangutan and a human woman, I'll give you $5 million. That kind of thing. So that was the backdrop of that. And people thought, oh, it was just a joke. Well, guess what? The next week, Donald Trump produces his birth certificate. So well, here is the birth certificate. Pony up. It's $5 million. People thought it was a joke. When Maher didn't pay, Trump turned around and sued him for $5 million, breach of contract. Donald Trump loves lawsuits. Well, eventually, well, look, he wasn't going to win that kind of lawsuit. So eventually, on April Fool's Day 2013, he withdraws the lawsuit, saying, well, he's gonna like file it again and stuff like that. But it was clear the lawsuit wasn't going anywhere. Now, what is the story there? The lesson is comedians get sued a lot of times for their jokes, sometimes by people who are genuinely offended and looking for money, and other times by people who are not necessarily looking for money, like Donald Trump, but he wanted to teach him a lesson, make the comedian spend money. You understand? Make
Right.
the comedian spend, and BMR ended up spending a lot of money on lawyers, even though the lawsuit was crazy. It wasn't gonna go anywhere. So that kind of thing. It's called like a strategic lawsuit. You know, no, strategic. He's not looking for money. He's looking to shut the person up. It's sort of
Yeah.
like what happened to John Oliver too on his show. There was this guy who owned the largest coal company in America, Robert Murray. This was the year after Donald Trump became president, and this another billionaire, Donald Trump's very good friend. So um, John Oliver made a joke about him that the man was uh, trying to undermine mine safety regulations because there was this accident that happened in Utah in one of the mines owned by this guy Robert Murray, and then 9 people got killed,
Mhm.
something like that. And then the government report said it was because of violation of mine safety regulations and stuff. But the billionaire was saying no, it was because of an earthquake. So there was that dispute there about the cause of that explosion. Then John Oliver came out and said, no, 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 this guy is a crazy geriatric, bad man. He's against coal industry regulations and all that. He just mocked him. Said it was a
Right.
geriatric Dr. Evil, all that stuff. Well, before the show aired, um, they called John Oliver. So what? You shouldn't air this show. Please cease and desist. If you air this episode, we are going to sue you. This is defamation. Oliver said, no, go ahead, sue me, be my guest. I'm gonna air this anyway, and he did. Well, and they made good on their threat. They sued him.
Yeah.
So a few weeks down the road, the lawsuit ends. Oliver wins. Sorry, Oliver wins, but he wasn't celebrating, even though he won. By the time the lawsuit ended, he had paid over $200,000 just in lawyers' fees and things. And his insurance premiums went up like 300%, like way up.
Jeez.
But that was
Wow.
the whole yeah, that was the whole point of the lawsuit, not to get money from Oliver, but to make him sweat, make him like really suffer through the process. So it was like a strategic lawsuit that sometimes they file against comedians. I'm talking about people who are not even comedians themselves. These are billionaires, Donald Trump, Robert Murray,
Yeah.
but they come into the comedy space and like try to shut people up. So that's the thing. Comedians make jokes for a living and they offend people. Well, if you offend people like that in a society like America, where people are addicted to litigation, you're bound to have a lot of lawsuits like this. And I cover so many of them in the book. Both Jerry Seinfeld, Jimmy Kimmel, John Oliver, uh, Jim Norton. I mean, so many. Gary Shandling, Dave Chappelle, Cat Williams, Jay Leno, just you name it. It's like it's funny because one of the reviewers of this book, he said, well, if your name is not in this book, then you're not important in comedy. Well, I wouldn't go that far. But, the book has the names of
Yeah,
whoever you could think about in comedy. Michael Shea, just name it. Jay Leno, Conan
yeah.
O'Brien. So everybody's like, gets a share here. David Letterman. Yeah, so there are lots of issues here. Some concerning breach of contract, like Howard Stern and their issues, or, just free speech. But the section on free speech and copyright infringement, joke stealing, yeah, those are, I think, the biggest.
Yeah, I wanted to bring. I wanted. Sorry to cut you off. I want to bring that up because you mentioned Cat Williams, and he recently brought that up in pop culture recently about joke stealing, and that was very prevalent just recently. So tell us a little bit more about joke stealing
Oh, joke
and
stealing
how
is,
that's dealt with.
yeah, it's a big thing, an inside baseball kind of thing with comedians. There's so much. I mean, like there are two things here when it comes to joke stealing. It's like a paradox. One says you shouldn't. The first rule in comedy is you don't steal jokes. That's Eric Gruber. Then another person says, well, if we could protect our jokes in comedy, he said it's easier to stop a serial thief it's easier to stop a serial murderer, a serial killer than a joke thief. He
Yeah.
said, and that was David Brenner. He said it's easier to stop a serial killer than a joke thief. If we could protect our jokes in comedy, I'd be a billionaire today somewhere in Europe. He said that was David Brenner, a comedy legend.
Hmm.
So there are those two things, a paradox. One says the first rule in comedy is you don't steal jokes. And the other person says, actually, no, in comedy, it's easier to protect, it's easier to catch a serial killer than a joke thief. In other words, stealing jokes in comedy is like just the way it is. It goes par for the course. But so those are the two opposing um, ideas about joke stealing in comedy. But the reality is, yeah, it is a serious problem in comedy. It's been there for a long time, and now it's even more serious because comedy today, your joke is like your money in the bank. Because comedy today is sort of like serious business, a career. So if somebody steals your jokes, it's like they are stealing your merchandise, something you're selling to make a living. So jokes today are that much more important than they have ever been. And then the places where the platforms for joke stealing disputes, they have increased. For instance, there is now Twitter, X, formerly Twitter. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So there are issues now about joke stealing on Twitter, like the case of Conan O'Brien. Somebody, wrote a joke on Twitter about the Washington Monument, and then the same evening, Conan O'Brien renders the same joke on his show. Well, there are two people here. One is a guy who doesn't have much public profile, and then Conan has a national profile. So if somebody takes your joke, but the person has a bigger profile, a bigger microphone, guess what? It's kind of not fair, but the public will give credit for that joke to that person with a bigger microphone. So so this guy sues Conan O'Brien. So you stole my joke about the Washington Monument, and then the issues were, okay, I mean, to say somebody stole a joke, you have to show that they had access to steal the joke.
Yeah.
Maybe they saw you, they came to a comedy club where you were performing and you made the joke and they stole the joke. Or you have to show that they got the joke from somewhere that they had access to. Well, in today's world of social media, if a joke is on Twitter, that's like proof positive right there that maybe you saw the
Yeah.
joke on Twitter. So your issue is now to show that you did not actually steal the joke, even though it was on Twitter, to prove that you came up with the joke independently of the other person. And that's the real dispute there. I think they ended up settling the case. Conan, paid him off and he left. But I mean, as of today, the whole thing is about deny, deny, deny. Conan said he didn't get the job from this person's Twitter account. But that was how that ended. But again, it really points up the issues we have with joke stealing. Or the one with Michael Shea. Somebody, a TikTok performer, sues Michael Shea that Michael Shea took her joke on TikTok, about a home girl who helps people solve problems, all that stuff. And Shea is saying, well, no, I didn't. Well, you know, again, you have unequal power here. Shea is a national figure, and this TikTok performer is somebody with a lesser profile. So
Right.
if somebody takes your joke with a higher profile and the public gives that person the credit for the joke, then what are your options? What are your remedies? What can you do? Can you sue? If you sue, can you win? Those kinds of considerations. But I covered those cases here too. Or if it's still a if it's still a joke from Saturday Night Live or something of that nature, and then somebody's saying, "Well, you stole my joke. Pay me for stealing the joke." So those joke stealing issues, they are a big thing. Unfortunately, in comedy, copyright protection for jokes are not as robust as protection for, let's say, products in other industries, say music or movies. Movies are well protected from copyrights, when it comes to copyright and stuff. For instance, in comedy, you know, the premises of the joke, the setup, you have the setup and then you have the punchline. Well, what is protected is just the punchline. And then as long as somebody could take the punchline and put the punchline in different words, yeah, he's home free. So the setup, the premises are completely unprotected. And then the punchline is protected in a very limited way. Well, if you go to movies, for instance, the plot line is protected in movies. The plot line and
Yeah.
how the thing ends, these things are all protected. But in comedy, no. So the protection in comedy is very minuscule, small compared to protection in other, similar, areas. So that's why you have issues of joke stealing in comedy um, being so big as they are, because it's just so easy to steal jokes, and the problem is jokes today have become way more important than they ever have been because jokes today are money like they have never been before. So it's easier to is so now here's the paradox. Here's the paradox. It's easier than ever before to steal a joke. Yet the jokes themselves have become more lucrative than ever before. You see what I'm saying? There's that sense there, that
Yeah.
conflict there. You know, I mean, not
Yeah. I
ideally,
mean, you got people blowing up like online, just
yeah,
off of like Instagram and
yeah,
TikTok. Like you said, off of like jokes that's been heard like many years ago, and they
exactly,
setting them up differently.
yeah,
So they setting the jokes up differently, and but the premise is still there. But like you can't do anything about it.
exactly. You can. And jokes are money. Jokes today are
Hmm.
big money. Because like I said in the book, comedy today is at a golden age. Comedians now have a much bigger profile, a much bigger profile, and a stronger footprint. On the pop culture, the cultural conversation. I mean, if you saw Jon Stewart, he came back the other day on the Daily Show. He made these jokes about Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and the blogosphere, the internet, every place blew up. Everybody was responding to what he said. I mean, that's how significant comedians have become today as you
Yeah,
know leaders in the public conversation. They've become more like rock stars. Something you never
yeah,
had.
they like the rappers, they like the
Yeah,
rappers of the day.
right. Something you never had even just one generation ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, just one generation ago, if your child wanted to become a comedian, you would tell him, no, 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 please go get a good, do something where you can get paid. Don't do comedy.
yeah,
But it's a different world today. It's a different
yeah,
world today with comedy. So I mean, they have a higher profile. Comedy today is like at the golden age, and in a place like America, because it's at the golden age, there's money and fame to be made. So they attract a lot of lawsuits. So what you notice when you look at comedy and the comedy landscape is that lawsuits have emerged increasingly as a cost of doing business in comedy. Lawsuits
Right.
are filed for various reasons. Sometimes people are looking for money to cash in on the fortune of a comedian, to ride their coattails. Or sometimes they are just doing it to shut them up, strategic suits like Donald Trump and Robert Murray. So for all sorts of reasons, comedy being at a golden age today, because of the influence comedians have on the pop culture. Yeah, so some people want to like shut them up or maybe just make some money from them. So it's a different thing now with
Right.
our society, which is so litigious and addicted to litigation. Comedy has become like the shiny new object, you know, for lawsuits and people who file lawsuits. So it has become like, you know, a part of what you have to consider on the balance sheet. If you're a comedian, the balance sheet, it has, lawsuits as a factor affecting the bottom line. So those kinds of things. So it's part of the things I cover in the book. Comedy goes to court, and again, like I said, it's not just for comedians alone. It's also about you know the broader society. So if somebody like wants to be, is an easy read to even before the law intervenes with the book. There are lots of wonderful stories about what comedians did or what they were doing before they got sued. Those stories in and of themselves are very interesting. Stories
They are.
about yeah, why did he get sued? What did he do before he got sued? Those stories in the first place about why they got sued and what they were doing. Those are very exciting stories that if we didn't even talk about the law, those stories in and of themselves, yeah, are very engaging and really interesting for the reader out there who wants to maybe read something fun on a beach, at a park, at a mall, that kind of thing.
Awesome. So like, like very early on, you mentioned about like self-defense for our sense of humor, and like when we think about like beyond like the obvious legal pitfalls, like are there ways that being overly cautious can actually like stifle our creativity and joy?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is the real concern. Self-censorship. Self-censorship. I mean, if you have to like get in your own head all the time before you render a joke, then it becomes a problem. I mean, somebody said a joke that is politically correct is no joke at all, you know.
Right.
So that becomes a real problem. I mean, okay, are we at the point now where we can no longer just take a joke, or should we like maybe apply these standards of uh, cancel culture and wokeness to other areas, say politics, and not comedy? I mean, is a comedian like, let's say somebody is a member of the U.S. Congress and he's having a debate, participating in a debate on the floor of the House about tax policy
Mhm.
or issues of war and peace. Is it the same thing as a guy at a comedy club, making a joke? So how seriously do we take these things when it comes to comedy? Can we just say, well, why don't we just have fun and enjoy the jokes and just put those other things aside? Why don't we maybe confine those worries to more serious sectors of life, like politics and things of that nature? Well, if you have to apply the thing to comedy, if you have to apply the thing to comedy rather than politics, then it leads to what they call, self-censorship, which kind of makes comedy unfunny, so to speak. You know, it may be okay for a politician to be careful the way he or she talks about things because, they govern society, they apply the law, they do more serious stuff. For comedy, people are just trying to be funny, make a joke. Well, should you be as strict with them and rigorous with them as you would be with somebody in politics? So those two things, those are the questions people continue to struggle with. I mean, where should you apply these standards, these new standards of contemporary times, cancel culture, political correctness, wokeness, this this sentiment to protect other people, this ethos that are coming up today about protecting the vulnerable in our society, well, how far should you take it? Who should be the people that you apply these standards to? You know,
Mhm.
should it be comedians? So yeah, so that's the thing. With comedy, it leads to self-censorship, and a politically correct joke is no joke. It tends to be unfunny, and yeah, that's part of the problem today.
That is. Then you start second guessing yourself, and then you lose your true identity about who you are as a person.
You lose
And I think that's the robbery that we that's the ultimate crime that we're doing, especially when we become a part of the lynch mob. We robbing people of who they really are.
yeah, you do that. You do that, and you deprive the society of the chance to really, get some really good jokes out there. I mean, refrain, if people refrain from going into certain areas, then the jokes are not of the quality that they would have been before. So the enjoyment of the jokes, you know, suffers just as much. So that's the thing. But again, like I said, it's a matter of balance. It's a matter of balance. How much can society tolerate? How much will they take? I mean, should the society be as sensitive as we have become? And it might be getting worse because um, every new season, they add new people that should be protected. I mean, being gay, for instance, being gay was about 10 years ago or maybe 15. Making a gay joke
Yeah,
was like, hey, that's, risque, whatever. Now, being gay is like nothing. It's not about being transgender. That's a new line now. Transgender
yeah,
people and other people who keep getting added. So being gay now is like nothing, unlike 20 years ago. Being gay is okay. We accept that now. Then there are new people coming on all the time that you have to be careful the way you talk about these things. And so, you know, the danger to free speech, those things continue to rise as new people are added, new people who deserve protection, you know. Yeah, so it's a different environment today than it was. Question is, can this environment remain a place where you can still make jokes? Is it hospitable enough? The jury is still out on that.
yeah. It is. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. Carl, if there was any final words, and then along with those words, maybe like a chapter, what would be your favorite chapter in the book? Maybe give us those words of wisdom, and just tell us what your final well your favorite chapter of the book would be.
Two things. Two things. First, even those of us who are not comedians, right? All of us who are just everyday people in society, this what comedians are doing and the fights they get into are very important to us. Comedians you can think of them as our proxies, our dogs in the fight about free speech. For instance, I mean, a guy like Elon Musk, he said something the other day that I thought was interesting. I mean, look, I don't agree with the guy's. I don't quite share his worldview, but he said something that I thought was right. He said like, um, if you believe in free speech, if you believe in free speech, you should be able to allow somebody that you don't even like to be able to say something that you don't even like. If
Hmm.
you believe in free speech, you can't allow free speech to be something that happens only when they say something you like or somebody that you like. In other words, if our society is going to remain a free society that believes in the First Amendment, then, we must allow free speech even for those saying things that we don't like. And frequently, comedians are those people who say things that tend to offend, the mob. Comedians tend to fly very close to the sun. So if we can protect the speech of those who fly closest to the sun, then we can protect the speech of all the rest of us. So the rest of us in society who care about free speech, yeah, comedians are our dog in the fight. They are at the front lines of this fight about protecting free speech in a new environment of woke ideology and cancel culture. So I guess my point is, even if you're not a comedian, you should be concerned about the issues that comedians are dealing with today, like free speech. And with respect to this book, um, if you only read one chapter of the book, let's say you don't read too much, you just want to read only one chapter. Yeah, you can read the biggest chapter in the book, which concerns free speech, comedians and the right of free speech. I mean, all the comedians, all the famous comedians out there, they've had one brush or the other with the law, with people suing them about free speech and things like that. And of course, finally, like I said, even if you're not reading the book for the law, you can just read the book for the stories. Lots of wonderful stories about comedians and the things they did before they got sued, and So even those stories, in and of themselves, are very engaging. A fine read for the beach, for the park, for the mall, wherever you go. So yeah. So again, like somebody said, um, I think it was Andy Angle, the founder of the Manhattan Comedy School. He said stand-up comedy is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that's
so,
true.
so yeah, so folks can read the so folks can read the book at least for that reason, to look at the stories and the jokes and all the things that happened in the book before we even started to talk about the lawsuits and things. Those kinds. So they can
Uh-huh.
just read the stories. Yes.
Right.
So those two things is what I want to leave them with. The number one, you can just read the stories and enjoy the comedy in the stories themselves. And then number two, if you care about free speech in our society, you have a dog in the fight over the battle lines in the First Amendment. And comedians are that dog in the fight. They are your dog in that fight. If you can protect them, like I said, people who fly closest to the sun, then you can protect all the rest of us.
Love it. I love it, Carl. Man, Carl, man, I can tell you really love this country. I can tell you really love the rest of this planet. You know, um, man, we need more people like you. Um, yeah, you really dropped a lot of jewels on us today. Real invaluable stuff, and your book is very invaluable. I really appreciate it. Give us your socials if we want to connect with you.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I
so they
know
can.
we got the website.
Wonderful, wonderful. I write a blog. It's called Ocas Law. Uh, yeah, reflections on comedy and other matters. So if they can go to Ocas Law, uh, https ocaslaw.com,
Okay.
and they can read a lot about my blog. I continue to blog about comedy, but not everything on the blog is in the book. The book contains maybe
Okay.
just 20% or 25% of what I have on the blog. So if you like reading the book and the issues covered in the blog gives you like a wealth of information about these kinds of things. And it covers commentary, not just on the law, but on other issues. Like the one I wrote the other time is about moonlighting in comedy. There was this journalist from NPR in Philadelphia who got fired for moonlighting as a comedian. And so those kinds of issues, you know, social commentary. I have a lot of social commentary on the blog, apart from just law itself. So yeah. So if you like the contents of the book, yeah, you can also get more stuff from the blog because it's called ocalslaw.com. So https.ocalslaw.com. My name is Carl. You put an O at the beginning and S as in Stephen at the end. ocalslaw.com. And of course, the book is available on Amazon, at bookstores. It's called Comedy Goes to Court. When people stop laughing and start fighting, it's a lot of fun, both for the law and for the general reading.
Awesome. All right. So, Carl, before you run off to defend the next stand-up star, I got one final question for you. What's the worst dad joke you ever heard that technically might be legal?
The worst damn joke. Oh, there are lots of them. Um, well, I could get in trouble talking about it, so maybe I shouldn't. But I just leave it there. But
All right.
if they read the book, they'll find the book, they'll find that joke somewhere in the middle of the book. So within the pages of the book. Yeah, I'm glad you brought
That's
it up. I'm glad you brought it up. That should be a reason to read the book and find out the answer to that question.
All right, let's leave our listeners on a cringy but harmless note. Thanks again for making us laugh and think today. And remember, folks, my Transformers out there, when in doubt, a well-timed meme is always safer than a risky joke. Catch us next time on the Transform You Live show. Don't forget to share this wonderful episode with a friend, a family member, a aunt, cousin, whoever it may be. Carl's wonderful people. I'd love to have him again if you choose to do so in the future. So until next time, many blessings, peace, and lots of love.
Thanks for having me.